Well, the National Whistleblower Center was established back in the 1980s, and a good half of our board members were involved with police abuse in Rhode Island and racism in South Africa, because those issues really come together when it comes to whistleblowing. You need an avenue, you need a honest broker to go forward and bring forth, problems of society, fraud and corruption without retribution. And when it comes to policing, those type of avenues are sorely lacking. That's a big problem in our society. You have police agencies typically self-regulating themselves. And if someone were to ask Iran to self-report its own human rights abuse, one wouldn't expect to see much transparency going on. And that's pretty much the problem that you have in a lot of the police departments in America. Right, they drag their feet because they're dependent on the police officers to help them with their high-profile cases and convictions, which they require for promotion. So it's difficult for the prosecuting attorneys to do the job adequately when it comes to looking at police misconduct. And you have a wall of silence in the police department, which keeps those who truly want to speak out, the real heroes within the police department, from doing so, because there's no meaningful avenue. If they speak out, they'll be drummed out. And so until there's a reliable third-party investigative organization over police departments, you're going to have the same cycle going on.
What can communities and maybe states do to generate that?
Well, often there's a state or a citizens panel or a citizens review board, and it would be important to get the local representatives to look at it and insist that citizen participation be increased, or that the first round of investigations be left up to third-party independent persons who have no association with the police department. That is the type of independence that's necessary if you're going to get accountability that people will have the trust in, so they don't have to sit around and just heap themselves with more frustration and wait on things until things boil over. There has to be a legitimate broker set up and in place, and the persons who are going to fight and scream the hardest about it is going to be the police department. And that's not to just criticize the police department. It's the same with every organization. When we tried to get oversight on the FBI, the FBI was screaming. When you try to get oversight on national defense, the national defense screams. Everyone screams because no one wants meaningful oversight over their organizations. And when it comes to police, it has been typically the hardest one to get some meaningful oversight over.
I saw yesterday where California Governor Jerry Brown has signed a ban on secret grand juries investigating police misconduct. How does the organization feel about that?
Well, again, it's not so. You have the state apparatus in control of the grand juries, and because they're secret and there's no accountability as to what's going on before the grand jury, you can get a grand jury to indict or not indict based on what the attorney appearing before the grand jury wants. So they don't really provide a true avenue of transparency as to whether or not improper action has occurred and whether charges should be filed. It's not a very good methodology.
One of the bullet points that Mallory sent me was regarding the forgotten law of the Founding Fathers that declares every American responsible for reporting fraud and misconduct. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
All right. During this Revolutionary War, the head of the Continental Navy was involved with abuse of English prisoners, and the the sailors on the ship were outraged and decided to take an oath that one of them would leave to report the physical abuse of these prisoners to the Continental Congress. And that soldier left and made the report, and the Continental Congress took action and removed the commander of the Continental Navy from his position. In response, the commander's brother was, I believe, the governor of Rhode Island, very powerful, connected family, and they ended up rounding up and throwing into prison some of these sailors, and they charged them with crimes. And the Continental Congress did its next amazing thing, which they took money from the U.S. Treasury, which was very lacking during wartime, and hired a lawyer to represent the whistleblowers and gave them the best legal defense so they could defeat the charges that were brought against them in the state, and they won. And the Continental Congress passed a law saying that it was the duty and responsibility of all Americans to report wrongdoing and abuse of people in power as soon as possible to the proper authorities. That is the founding backbone of our country, the true spirit that our society needs to be accountable. And what we end up with in police departments is there's really no accountability because they're self-regulated entities. There's usually very little third-party oversight of police departments, and that results in alienation of the public. They have no trust that anything they report will be adequately responded to, and more importantly, people are afraid if they report it, they're going to end up getting arrested themselves or subject to surveillance, which does happen. And until we end up with a third-party verified system that individuals believe in, that justice and accountability will come forward, you're not going to have the trust of the American people. That's a major sticking point that this country needs to come forward with. You can't allow, it's not really the Justice Department, it's not the local prosecutors who should be handling police abuse cases. There should be a third-party professional organization who is not tied to any group or entity, whose sole purpose is to try to get to the truth and understanding what happened. And until you have that type of third-party independent body, why should anyone trust the results one way or the other? It's just a manipulation of a system.
I understand that the theme for the summit is Black Lives Matter. Now, once that movement got going, of course, there was the reaction, well, white lives matter too, all lives matter, and then recently, after the killing of a Memphis police officer, blue lives matter. Do they all matter, or is there a reason to emphasize Black Lives Matter relative to everything else?
It's important to understand that the weakest persons in society need the most protections. And what you have is a legal system that provides the most protections for the wealthiest and those who have access to the best lawyers. So it's an unfair and unjust system in that regard. All lives matter equally. And the problem is our system does not treat all lives equal when it comes to the ability to obtain justice.
All right, well, thank you very much. I don't think I have any other questions. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I'd just like to note that the National Whistleblower Center is at the forefront of attempting to set up meaningful ways in which whistleblowers can come forward to report wrongdoing and abuse. And we have been trying to make it a goal of our organization to create a true law throughout this nation that will protect whistleblowers, and we just don't have it. And there's a misconception of the American people that whistleblowers get meaningful protection. However, the laws are not very robust in most jurisdictions, and there's very little protection for whistleblowers. And once maybe the first step is making sure that whistleblowers get the protection they need so they can speak out when they see wrongdoing.